ThinkFest. I hope it'll get warmer during the day, at least, and if the weather doesn't improve, at least the conversations will warm all of us. Just wanted to take a few minutes to thank a further few people, because I think it's also important to recognize others. We do want to recognize the great help that the British Council has actually given us for this year. We have 2 speakers that have come in through the British Council, so we are very grateful for that. And Najam Saab spoke yesterday about, for all the great sponsors who have worked with us. But I do also want to thank our committee, of which Najam Saab is chair, because this event would not be put together if it weren't for them. So I do want to recognize several members of our committee, and you would realize through the names that a lot of them are from different political parties, different intellectual bents. So we have a very diverse committee, so that one side isn't dominant, creating a true reflection of what we want to showcase here. So I want to thank Senator Musaddiq Malik, who is a federal minister, but also on our committee, and he's been instrumental in actually making sure, speaking to the ministers here and getting things happen. Professor Alia Iqbal Naqvi, Asma Chishti, who was here, who actually coined the term ThinkFest, so very grateful for that always. Faisal Naqvi, who is a lawyer and very active in the committee. Professor Iram Ziar Raja, who takes care of all our arts things. Miftah Ismail, who's a former finance minister also. Najam Saab, of course, as chair of our committee. And very importantly, P. Saad Ihsanuddin. I'm sure a lot of you know him. And the reason that we have actually been able to walk into Alhambra and come here is due to P. Saad Ihsanuddin, because he intervened, spoke to Senator Pervez Rashid Saab, who I profusely thank, because if it weren't for Senator Pervez intervening and helping us, we would not be sitting here. So a big thank you to P. Saad and also to Senator Pervez for his great support at the last minute. And I do want to thank the executive director of Alhambra, Nawaz Gondal Saab. He's very new to the post, but he kind of rallied all his troops to make sure that the Alhambra is at least in walkable condition. So thank you so much. And of course, my old school friend, Razi Ahmed, who hopefully will come in today. He was abroad, who is the chair of the Alhambra board, who's always been a great support. Now, while we try to figure out, I've actually taken this time so that the SMD is figured out. Someone changed the SMD yesterday. So we don't have control over it. But we have a great exhibition that we want to showcase now. And it has been curated by Professor Murtaza Taj and Professor Nadra Khan from LUMS. And this is a great collaboration between an art history person and a scientist to showcase the heritage of our country. So I will first request Professor Nadra Khan to come and say a few words. She was supposed to show you something, but maybe we'll go down and see it at the exhibition itself. But maybe Nadra can come and say a few words about the exhibition.
Thank you very much, Yaqub. Thank you for inviting us to showcase our exhibition here. The first opening took place at LUMS on December 12th. Dr. Murtaza and I have been working on this for years now with a very small team. The team's introductions and everything are in this USB that we unfortunately cannot show you, but I will take a few minutes to give you a bit of a context of what this exhibition is all about. The title of the exhibition is Maharaja Ranjit Singh's Tosha Khana. Now that Tosha Khana, the treasury, what happened to it? Where is it now? What were the objects like? What was the material culture that existed and flourished in the 19th century Punjab? Is something that we investigated, and the exhibition showcases a tiny little tip of the ice on what we found so far. Dr. Murtaza Taj is an associate professor of computer sciences. He is the leading person working in the heritage sector, and I've been very fortunate to have worked with him. We created a website which is sikhvirsa.org.pk that showcased artifacts belonging to the Lahore Darbar, Maharaja Ranjit Singh's court. The initial idea was to showcase the Lahore Museum Sikh Gallery and the Lahore Fort Sea Gallery carrying the Princess Bamba collection. The museum bit could not be covered, but we did, showcase the Lahore Fort Sea Gallery. That led us to investigating a little more. What is housed in these galleries does not match the descriptions of the material culture that we find in contemporary historical sources, whether these were the court chronicles of the Maharaja, the Umdatut Tawarikh, or Europeans visiting the Lahore Darbar and recounting the regalia that they saw. So what happened to it? And we started investigating this, and we found fascinating information about what the East India Company was doing. Punjab was annexed in 1849, and the next day, Maharaja Ranjit Singh's treasury was declared to be confiscated material. And that confiscated material started to be parceled out among East India Company officials. A big chunk was sent off to Queen Victoria, and then the rest was auctioned within the Lahore fort where the Maharaja and his family resided. So they started holding these auctions in the Diwan-e-Aam, in the Shah Burj, which was the Sheesh Mahal, the residential area, as well as in front of the Moti Masjid that was serving as the treasury. The Maharaja started calling it the Moti Mandir. I had all of these images in my pen drive that is unfortunately not working. But that probably is going to succeed in arousing your interest and inspiration to visit the exhibition that our chief guest, Mr. Murtaza Solanki, will soon be opening. I will invite Dr. Murtaza Taj to say a few words about his contribution to this wonderful project, which started with the Sikh Virsa website and then led us towards finding information about this lost material culture, the lost treasure of the Maharaja's Darbar.
Bismillah Rahman Rahim. First of all, thank you to the Honorable Chief Guest, spokesperson to the President, Murtaza Solanki Saab, and to all the guests present in the hall and attending this festival. Many thanks for taking out time and coming here. So, very rare you will find a computer scientist in an event like this, and I also, feeling a bit out of quarter standing in front of all the great artists and art historians and people with so much experience in art and history. I'm just a very beginner, but my relationship to this is I started working on the cultural heritage back in 2013 when I returned to Pakistan after completing my PhD, and then I started thinking about how can computer science serve the country, and cultural heritage is something which I started working on. And my idea was that while physical conservation is very expensive, time consuming, and it's a repeated process, and our country has very limited resources. Why not we create digital twins of all the rich art and cultural heritage that we have, so that we can present it to the wider audience across the world, and we can have a copy which can be used later on for actual conservation and preservation as well. With this idea, we started working, and with the help of USAID, we introduced terrestrial laser scanning in Pakistan and started training for photogrammetry and various other tools. My work currently spans all across Pakistan, and currently we are working in the Diame Bhasha Dam flood basin, where we have documented over 45,000 rocks which are available online. And with this kind of background, I started working with Dr. Nadra on conserving, preserving, documenting Mughal and Sikh culture. Here, the the challenge that we faced in this project was, as Dr. Nadra mentioned, that large number of items were being auctioned. And so there's a huge list of items which are being auctioned, which is available. And then these auction items were taken away from the country. And because of the COVID and the increase in digitization, these items started to appear into the museum's website, which have them in their collections. And this kind of presented a very unique opportunity where there is a list of items which are lost or disappeared, and now there's so much available on the internet. Can we establish a relationship and tell a story about which item took which journey and ended up where? And at the same time, there are a huge number of documents that are available that we can now scan and digitize. So this kind of presented a big challenge in, finding an item in a rich repository available on the internet in the document. And this is where I came in, and we said we are living in an era of GPT, or we call it large language models. Why can't we use AI? And AI can look at an item from the auction list, go all over the internet, find whatever it can find, go in all the document that we have scanned, and can give us a report or a summary. And then art historian like Dr. Nadra and other experts can look at that report and make a real story behind it. So this is where I came in, introducing automation in speeding up recovering the stories of our culture and heritage. And here as well, in this exhibition, we have tried to do that, and we have created the story of 3 different objects, which is presented today here in the exhibition. But this is just the tip of the iceberg. There are large number of objects which we are studying, which we are discovering, and we are planning to hold many such exhibitions in future. With this, I stop here, and I again invite Dr. Nadra to tell a bit more about the 3 different objects that for which we have developed the story. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Murtaza. So we have created 3 models of lost objects. One model is Maharaja's Bazuband that used to hold the Kohinoor diamond. And we have a narrative that walks you through to what happened to that diamond and where is it now. There are several other diamonds, several other gems. You must have heard about the Kohinoor, but have you heard about Darya-e-Noor? Are you familiar with Timur ruby, the spinel? Where are they? Of course, these are the stories, these are the objects that we have been tracing that have led us to fascinating details. Part of these are exhibited downstairs. Then the Maharaja used to travel in a silver bungalow, not a bungalow, bungalow, a thatched roof, and that thatched roof was made with pashmina shawls. What does it mean when I say a silver bungalow? The bungalow was a double-storied carriage, a throne on the move, that the core would have been of wood, but it was covered with solid sheets of silver. Then the Maharaja's own bed that he used to sleep in, that used to stand in the Sheesh Mahal apartments. What did that look like? We have a description by Alexander Burns, who was a British spy, who came into Lahore documenting, noting all the riches and all the belongings that, of course, the British were eyeing. So we've created a small model of the silver bungalow and the Maharaja's bed. Now, what were the techniques of working on these metal sheets? Repoussé and chasing, munabbat kari. So while we are investigating these historical items that are now lost, we are also celebrating the workmanship of the craftsmen that had this impetus through the Maharaja's interest in such activities and who created these beautiful objects. For that, we have created this small catalog that I would like to present to our chief guest here. This catalog is dedicated to all craftsmen whose hands have been creating beautiful objects across the globe for people, again, across the globe. Thank you very much, and I hope you enjoy the exhibition. And I would now like to invite Mr. Murtaza Solangi to say a few words.
जे गल होए लाहौर च ते ओह ते पंजाबी च ही होनी चाहिदी है और मसला यह है कि साढ़े कोल मेहमान भी हैं जो शायद पंजाबी उर्दू मसला होए so my apologies to Lahoris. Let me sincerely and profusely thank the people who made it almost impossible for my two friends to show what they had to show you through this screen, because that would trigger some excitement and there will be some appetite that you will actually go down and see the real exhibition. So thank you those people who created this little problem. These two good doctors, Dr. Nazra and my namesake, have done really a great work. And they have made it possible for all of us, especially for the young people, to really conceive what happened in those 4 decades of Maharaja Ranjit Singh's rule. It's hard for me to call it an imperial or monarchic rule, because it was not. He did not have a successor, and what happened after the death of Maharaja Ranjit Singh, you know fairly well. But what I see in those 4 decades was a model of indigenous rule and uniting of Punjab, and even going beyond all the way to Peshawar and Kashmir and extending it to Multan. So, but what I'm more fascinated in those 4 decades, despite the great craftsmanship that they were just telling you and we will see in the exhibition, is it was fairly secular rule. Despite Maharaja Ranjit Singh, who believed in his faith, you had great Muslims and Hindus in important positions in Maharaja Ranjit Singh's period. But what is fascinating, what these two doctors have done, they have given us the opportunity to see that great work of craftsmanship, regardless of where Kohinoor diamond is, and you know, besides the controversy if you are going to get it or get back or not. But most of the treasure that they have made it possible for us to see did not consist of some loot and plunder from outside. Most of that is indigenous, local craftsmanship, and that's those skills of the people of Punjab. They are really a work of wonder. So regardless of the weaponry and the coins and the jewelry and the gold and the carriages and whatever, So I sincerely thank Dr. Murtaza Taj and Dr. Nazra for making this possible, and I thank them that they thought I was fit to come here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Murtaza Solanki Saab, for your kind words and your encouragement. We have two short videos that will give you more of a context of what we have tried to do through this exhibition. This is a Heritage at Lums project. Lums is dedicated in creating a sense of and bringing a sense of academic rigor to the heritage sector, in creating knowledge that is deeply invested in preparing historians and stewards of tomorrow for our culture and heritage. And now that the videos are here, let's watch.
Lahore Darbar was known far and wide for its glamour and glitter. Court events were excellent opportunities for courtiers to see and be seen in their finest clothes and jewelry, get glimpses of the royals' lavish lifestyle, and witness the unveiling of valuable gifts the Maharaja gave away to visitors. Ranjit Singh authorized the manufacturing of countless gold and silver objects, both for his personal use and for gift-giving. Demand for these valuable objects was so high, his patronage revived craft industries and contributed to the economic stability Punjab experienced after decades of political turbulence. An age-old metalworking tradition used across Punjab called repousse, locally known as munabbatkari, continued to enjoy the Maharaja's patronage. Low-relief designs in gold cover his royal throne. The walls of the Golden Temple, and silver sheets cover the door panels of the Nankana Sahib Gurdwara. Repousse most likely adorned a lot of objects that have been recorded in historical documents but are missing today, including his throne on wheels, the silver bungla, his gold bed, as well as gold and silver chairs, gold and silver hodas, canopies, and even tent poles. He also commissioned endless rows of utility objects, all of which were stored in his Toshakhana-e-Bahla until Punjab was annexed by the British in 1849. Though most of Maharaja Ranjit Singh's treasurable items may no longer be with us, the societies that cultivated the traditions he commanded live on. Repousse on brass, copper, and mixed metals is a hallmark of cultural identity and traditional aesthetics in Punjab's home decor. Found across small heritage stores and high-end shopping malls, this metalworking technique showcases the lasting influence of a Maharaja who invested in local workers and revitalized an industry of craftsmanship that still thrives in Lahore and across Punjab. most remarkable items in Maharaja Ranjit Singh's Lahore Darbar was the royal Bangla-e-Nokra, or the silver Bangla, his throne on wheels pulled by 8 royal elephants. It was a double-storied marble that stood at such a great height, a ladder was needed to ascend its first floor. Its walls, arches, pillars, and ceilings were covered with pure silver sheets that were ornamented with the metalworking technique repoussé. A pashmina shawl made the Bangla's canopy, and the interiors were adorned with the finest carpets, cushions, curtains, and multicolored chandeliers. Everything was crafted with great care to showcase the grandeur and magnificence of the Lahore Darbar. The silver Bangla had an important role in state affairs, its impressive facade persuasive during diplomatic efforts. The Maharaja paraded it every year during the Dussehra festival with great pomp and pageantry. He would be followed by rows of troops riding horses and elephants, armed with glittering weapons, flaunting uniform regalia, and hoisting colorful banners. Through this grand spectacle, Ranjit Singh presented himself not just as a political leader, but as a righteous guardian of his realm, and the shining silver Bangla must have acted as monumental proof of his military and economic might. In 1831, the Maharaja took the Bangla to Ropar on the bank of the Sutlej River for a military parade and a meeting with the Governor-General Lord William Bentinck, an important diplomatic event for both parties. In 1837, General Sir Henry Fane, the Commander-in-Chief of the British Indian Army, also was received in the silver Bangla by the Maharaja. Ranjit Singh invited foreign delegates into his throne on wheels as an act of hospitality and an opportunity to show off the material splendor of the empire he created. Ranjit Singh died on June 27, 1839. Within a decade of his demise, his territory was annexed by the British, and the Maharaja's possessions were in the hands of the East India Company. Debates over the fate of his 2 thrones continued for 4 years. His golden throne was sent to London as a marker of their conquest, and in 1853, his silver mobile throne was offered for sale to the highest bidder. The bids for the Bangla stopped at only 33,000 rupees. Mr. Megh Raj, a loyal member of Ranjit Singh's treasury team and the keeper of the Toshakhana under the British Raj, was disturbed by this underestimation. He passionately let the British know that the Bangla had originally cost at least 60,000 rupees to make, approximately 290 million Pakistani rupees today. With this new information, the East India Company decided to collect the sheets of silver on the Bangla and turn them into bullion. The remarkable silver Bangla was destroyed. Historic beacon of the Maharaja's achievements and of the remarkable heights 19th century South Asian arts achieved under his patronage.
I would like to take a minute to thank our young but very small team who's played key roles in creating the artifacts and these videos. Zeenat Nabi is right there. You've heard her sweet, melodious voice, but she's the one who's the video editor. Abdullah Ahmad is right there. He's also our research assistant. He's a biology major from LUMS, is now in the making of becoming an art historian. Anas Kashmiri is also a comparative literature and creative arts major. He's also aspiring to become an art historian. Shirley is a computer scientist. She's not here with us today, but this is a small team that has worked with us for more than 2 years to create this small exhibition and the displays that you've seen. The Office of Advancement, of course, and the rest of the LUMS administration has been extremely supportive in getting us where we are today. Thank you very much for your interest and your attention.
Thank you so much, Dr. Nadra and Dr. Murtaza Taj. The exhibition is now open in the foyer, so after the session and in between sessions, you can go ahead and have a look at this. So thank you so much. Yes. Now we seamlessly move into, sorry for the delay earlier, we are slightly behind schedule, but not completely behind. So that's a good thing, why we have a 15-minute window in between things. Professor Piketty is a French economist who's a professor of economics at the School of Advanced Studies in the Social Sciences, the chair at the Paris School of Economics, and the Centennial Professor of Economics in the International Inequalities Institute at the London School of Economics. His work focuses on public economics, in particular income and wealth inequality. He is the author of the bestseller book Capital in the 21st Century. He has written another book called Capital and Ideology. He's also done a brief history of equality and, of course, has numerous papers, opinion pieces, and the like. So we're very grateful, Professor Thomas Piketty, that you are joining us today to give a talk on your best work on inequality. After his keynote, he will be in conversation with Professor Akbar Zaidi, who is the Executive Director of IBA Karachi, a political economist, but also a historian, and after a week, my boss. So quite happy to have this wonderful panel. But may I request Professor Thomas Piketty to please come and give his keynote address. After that, we'll have a conversation with Professor Akbar Zaidi. Thank you.
Hello. So thanks a lot for this invitation. So first, let me apologize for the fact that my English sounds a lot like French, and you know, I hope you can still understand me, and you know, I'd be very happy to answer questions. So I'm going to try to give you know, not too long lecture about our work that we have done at the World Inequality Lab at the Paris School of Economics on the history of equality and inequality. So I'm going to try to project some slides, if it is possible to show the slides, and I'm very happy. So the material I'm going to show you is not as beautiful as the material we've seen in the video just before me, but I think it can still be informative to show some historical evolution on inequality, which you know, in order to illustrate our work. So generally, so I don't know if there's. Okay, this is coming up. Okay, that's good. So waiting for this to come up. So let me say that, you know, generally speaking, so you can find a lot of material online in our World Inequality Report 2026, which we just published at the World Inequality Lab. So you can go. Everything I'm going to say during the talk, you know, you can get it online on the website WID.world, World Inequality Database. And you know, in this talk, you know, I'm going to show you some of this data. You know, there's a level of inequality and concentration of income and wealth in the world today, in particular in Pakistan, in South Asia, but also in every region of the world and at the world level in general, which is extremely large and has been rising, you know, in recent decades in many ways. But at the same time, you know, I want to give some optimistic message during this conference, and I will try to show you that if we take a long-run historical perspective, there's actually been a long-run historical movement toward more equality. In particular, today's richest countries have become more equal over time. So I don't know if I have something to move the slides. You don't have anything to, yeah, okay. So anyway, so let's start with this. So this is the website, you know, the World Inequality Database, which you can go online. And so I should say, you know, this World Inequality Database comes from a collective effort involving more than 200 scholars and researchers from all around the world, including Pakistan, including India, including, you know, all countries in the world are represented in the database. This is a very collective research program. So I'm going to show you some data from this database, but, you know, you can go online and see a lot more. I will also show you some material. So next slide. From the World Inequality Report 2026, which is a report which we just published, and we have version of the report in over a dozen languages, which you can which makes it easier to spread the information. I will, if you go to the next slide, I will also show you some results from a book of mine, which I strongly recommend, A Brief History of Equality. It's a much shorter book than my previous books. I should say, my previous books, Capital in the 21st Century and Capital and Ideology, are each 1,000 page long, so please don't read them unless you have a lot of time for this. Someone has the book. Congratulations for your effort. But, I really recommend this one, which is only 200 pages. You can read it in a weekend, and it's a sort of synthesis of my findings. And also, I would say it's a more optimistic approach, and this is called a brief history of equality, not a brief history of inequality, because I try to stress again this idea that in the long run, there's been a movement toward more equality. It did not happen like this. It came through major revolution, social struggles, class struggles, and it will continue like this. It has never been easy. It will never be easy. But in the end, it has been productive. So I will show a few material from this book. And next slide, I will also talk a little bit about a new project, the Global Justice Project, that we've been developing at the World Inequality Lab, where we try to look not only at the past history of inequality, but also we look at the future, and we try to draw some lessons from history to look at what a desirable future will be. What would global justice mean in the future? And we will publish a new report next June, and I will show you a few preliminary findings from this report in this presentation. And finally, next slide, I will try to talk about some of the political difficulties. Why is it that political coalition were able to form in the past in order to move toward more equality, and why is it that it's more complicated today? And I will talk a little bit about a project on political cleavage and social inequality, which there's actually more than 50 countries, including Pakistan, which are covered in this book. We have a whole chapter on the case of Pakistan. And if you go online to the World Political Cleavage and Inequality Database, you will find all the material. And we wrote a book more recently with Julia Cagé, who is here in the room, on the history of political conflict for the special case of France since the French Revolution. And I will talk a little bit about the lessons from this research as to why the political move toward more equality was possible in the past, and why it has been more difficult recently, and why, more importantly, in the future it might start again. So let me start the presentation, next slide, by starting with a map of inequality in the world today. So, I start with a very simple indicator, which is orders of magnitude are important. So we're talking about 10% of the population. So if we had complete equality, they should have 10% of total income. And if we had complete inequality, they should have 100%. So of course the real world is always in between 10 and 100. Now what's interesting is that it actually varies quite a lot. If you look in the world today, it goes from 20 to 70, basically. 20, 25 in Norway or Denmark, 70% in South Africa, which is the most unequal country in the world in our data set. In South Asia, it's going to be more 55, 60%. In Latin America, 60, sometimes close to 65%. In Nordic Europe, which are our most equal country in the database, is going to be 25%, or actually 20-25% today. So the first finding I want to stress is there is a lot of variation. So it's not as if inequality is always the same. Because sometimes some people will say, you only care about GDP, per capita GDP, the distribution does not matter. Well, the distribution does matter a lot. So we don't go from 10% to 100% for the top 10% income share, but we go from 20 to 70, which is enormous. So this is finding number one, lot of variation over the world. Finding number two, it's not always been like that. This variation between countries they were not like this 100 years ago. Europe was very unequal, with a strong elite making huge profits, sometimes from colonial exploitation, and we had some references to the, East India Company, theft in South Asia, but, it's incredibly unequal country 100 years ago. Now, that's very important because it means that it's not cultural. It's not, because sometimes you have the idea that some countries have a culture of inequality. India and its caste system are in love with inequality, and Sweden is in love with equality. Well, no, it's not like this. Things actually change over time, and it's primarily a matter of political choices, social struggles, revolution. And, Sweden 100 years ago was not social democratic at all. So these things have changed over time. And in fact, rich country today, so you can see Europe was part of, the reason why they were also able to become richer, is that, by becoming more inclusive, they actually they have also been able to develop. Now, this is one indicator, which is the share going to the top 10%. If you go next slide to another, the next indicator I want to show you, in a way, is even more important. This is the bottom 50% share. So, you have the top 10% share, bottom 50% share, and by definition, the rest goes to the 40% that are in between the top 10 and the bottom 50. So now, look again at the orders of magnitude, which are important. We are talking of 50% of the population. So if we lived in a completely egalitarian society, they should have 50% of total income. In a completely unequal society, they would have 0. So the real world, again, is in between, and it goes from about 5 to almost 30%. So in the most unequal country, again, will be South Africa, where the bottom 50% has only 5% of total income, whereas in Nordic countries, in Nordic Europe, you would have as much as 30% of total income for the bottom 50%. So if you think in terms of orders of magnitude, when you are when you have 30% of total income as the bottom 50%, okay, you are poorer than average. After all, you are the bottom 50%, but you are not that much poorer than average. It means that your average income is about 60% of average income of your country. So you are poorer than average, but you are not hugely poorer. Now, if you are in South Africa, if your income share is 5%, and you are 50% of the population, it means that your average income is only 1/10 of average income in your country. And of course, you have rich people who are a lot higher than this, but already as compared to the average of your country, you are at only 1/10. So in other words, the gap between the poor and the middle is enormous. And this is not just a matter of money, it's also a matter of dignity, a matter of political equality, and, it's very difficult to build democracy when, the differences in resources, in sort of access to housing, to food, to culture, to education, to everything is so, and to political influence, which is a topic we've been working and Julia has been working a lot on. When you have such enormous inequality in financial resources, it makes it just very difficult to make democracy work in general. And here again, I want to stress that this has changed a lot over time. So if you go next slide, I want to show an example of an historical evolution. So I show you the case of France because we have very good historical archives to study income and wealth in France starting in the French Revolution. But I should say, this is very representative of Western Europe in general. We have very similar numbers for Britain, Germany, and if you look at Sweden or Denmark or Norway, the move toward more equality in the long run has been even more spectacular than France, and I will show you some data. So what do we see on this graph? You see that the share of the top 10% has declined a lot over the 20th century, and the share of the bottom 50% has increased a lot. So this is what I was telling you before. Europe 100 years ago was close to Latin America today in terms of inequality and has become a lot more equal over time. You can see that the decline of inequality was mostly between World War I, 1910, and 1980, 1990. So, since 1980, 1990, you actually have a rise in inequality, which we have been talking a lot about, but you can see that this rise is a lot smaller than the decline. So in the end, in the long run, there has been a move toward equality. And, I think sometimes some people forget about this positive dimension in the long run, but it's very important. Now, this is quite spectacular for income. If we look next slide, it is more limited for wealth, but it is also, you also have an equalization of wealth. So just to make clear the difference between the two graphs, the previous figure was about income. So income is what you earn during a given year. So this can be your labor income or your capital income, profits, dividend, rent, but this is what you get during a given year. Here, this is wealth, so this is what you own. So this is everything you own. This can be a financial portfolio, stock, a bond. This can be a house. This can be a business. And this is always net wealth, so this is net of all your debt. Now, what you can see is that in the 19th century, inequality was really extreme. So, if you read Balzac or even Proust before World War I, wealth is extremely concentrated, and basically the top 10% owns everything. 80–90% of everything there is to own, and out of within the top 10%, it's mostly the top 1%, which at the time the top 1% alone is 50–60% of the total. So enormous wealth concentration, which is not really in the middle, because you can see that they are richer than the bottom 50%, so they are more intermediate between the rich and the bottom half, if you want. They used to be almost as poor as the bottom 50%. So in a way, there was no middle class in the 19th century, whereas today, they have increased significantly. And this is so this is true for France, but in fact, if you look next slide, you will see that this is general in Europe. So here, this is an average of Europe in 1913, Europe 2020, and I compare with US 2020, and you can see that wealth is still very concentrated, in the sense that the bottom 50% owns very little wealth. And I was looking at the number for Pakistan, before coming, the estimates that we have for Pakistan in the World Inequality Database, which are very approximate for Pakistan, because today it's only 5%. So, it's not as if, it's a lot better. So the thing about wealth is that it's always more unequal than income, and the progress that have been made over time in the long run are much more limited. So, the bottom 50% today, there's no country where they have basically more than 5 or 6 or 7% of total wealth. Always less than 10, and usually only 10% of total wealth in Europe. So, they were a bit richer than the bottom 50% by definition, but not that much. So there's been a reduction of wealth inequality. And let me tell you that from the point of view of the European capitalist elite and property owning class, this reduction of inequality was not something they wanted. 100 years ago, if you had told, European capitalists and property holders, you're going to compress your wealth share from 90% to 50%, they would have said, okay, this is communism, this is going to be the end of the world, the economy is going to collapse. In fact, this was not the end of the world, and if anything, the emergence of a patrimonial middle class, the fact that today it's not only the top 10% who have wealth, but also the next 40% who have a significant part of wealth. I mean, they could have even more, but it's a lot more than 100 years ago. I think was very positive and actually contributed in particular to post-World War II, who generally speaking, have more capacity to make projections in their life, to have plans for the future. When you have zero wealth, or when you have negative wealth, you have only debt, it means basically you have to accept everything you are being proposed, every wage, every working condition. So, from the point of view of people with a lot of property and sometimes who are their employer, this is good to have people who have no bargaining power. But I think from the point of view of society in general, the diffusion of wealth has been very positive. Now, how did it happen, and what lessons can we draw for the future? How can we go further in the future, and how did it happen in the past? Now, the reduction of inequality historically in Europe happened in different ways. It's partly due to sort of political shocks and political catastrophes. So, World War I and World War II, of course, caused by imperialism, and European countries were in competition in the 19th century, in particular, to build enormous colonial empires, and this contributed at the time to make them rich by exploiting resources and labor from the rest of the world. At the end of the day, with World War I and World War II, the destruction part. But this is not the most important part. In fact, the main reason why there was an inequality compression in the 20th century is because following these political shocks, there were new institutions, let's call them, welfare state or social democratic institutions, thanks to the labor movement, to trade union, to social democratic party, socialist party, communist party, also between 1930 and inclusive investment in education, health, public infrastructure, and this is why historically this compression of inequality was so useful. Now, if we want to go further in the future, let me say a few words. First, next slide. If we want to redistribute wealth, I think at some point we will need to redistribute inheritance. As long as the bottom 50% in Pakistan or in France or in the US receive 0 or less than 5% of all the wealth that has to be transmitted, I think concentration of wealth will remain very high in the future. So I think everybody should have minimum inheritance. So here this is a simulation where everybody would receive 60% of average wealth in inheritance at age 25. We could go even further. This is going to be a big political fight. I'm not saying that's easy to implement, but I think the development of the welfare state in the 20th century was not easy, and in the end it happened. This cost about 5% of GDP, as compared to a rise for the welfare state. In Europe, we went from 10% of GDP to 40–50% of GDP in total public expenditure. So, as compared to the building up of the welfare state, this is not so huge. But, this is a very significant change. I'm not saying this will happen next week or next year, but I think if we don't redistribute inheritance, you will still have very high wealth concentration in the future. So that's point number one. Then, next slide. If we look in the world in the past, let me stress again that we had important inequality compression. All the rich countries, if you look at Europe, North America, East Asia, Japan, and now more and more China is getting richer is now higher than the world average income, and is clearly converging with rich countries. All this part of the world have reduced their inequality quite significantly, whereas if you look at Latin America, Sub-Saharan Africa, Middle East, and South Asia, they have levels of inequality which are much higher, which in some cases the historical record. If you go to next slide, you will see that this is the historical reduction in inequality is particularly large if you look in Denmark, Norway, but generally speaking in European countries, but particularly in Nordic European countries. Now, 2.5 or 3 or 4, in Nordic European countries. If you were to look at the gap between the top 1% and say the bottom 10, the gap will be bigger, but the reduction will be also enormous. You will go from 100 or sometimes 200, 100 years ago to 5 or 10 today. So, the compression of inequality in today's richest countries has been really enormous. And it's really spectacular because if you look, next slide, and again, next slide, at productivity, in fact, these are, so this is the evolution of GDP per hours of work, and you can see that, today, so the level of productivity at the very top are about the same in Europe and North America. If you look next slide, country by country, you can see that countries like Denmark or Sweden, are even higher than the US in terms of productivity. And even in the US, the very large level of productivity have been associated historically with the compression of inequality. So this is just saying that, historically, the enormous compression of the scale of inequality that happened in the past century was not associated to an economic failure, but rather to an enormous economic success. The level of productivity, in particular, today in Europe, and in particular Nordic Europe with respect to the US, is really very impressive. That's important because sometimes, in the economic discourse today, when people make comparison between countries, in particular between US and Europe, they make typically two mistakes, one of the two, and usually the two at the same time. First, they forget to look at the price level. So, they compare GDP between US and Europe looking at the market exchange rate instead of purchasing power parity. Now, that's very important because the price level in the US today is very high. So, just to summarize, the euro-dollar exchange rate right now is around 110. Well, it's more 115, 116, 17, but last year it was about 110. So you get $110 for 1 euro. But in terms of price level, it should be 150. So if you look at the purchasing, the big picture, and the other mistake that it's typically made is forgetting the number of hours of work, and the fact that when you look at the US, they have much more working hours, and if you're interested in productivity, you should divide by the number of working hours. If you do the two, then this is the picture you have. So in other words, the bottom line is that the most equal countries in the world today are also the most productive. And the question is, how do you apply these lessons at the level of the world in general and for the future in the 21st century? And so this is, next slide, what we, can we go next slide? Sorry. Yeah, sorry. So this is what we propose to study in the Global Justice Project. So the Global Justice Project is a project where we try to draw on historical lessons and look in the future, what kind of scenario, when we talk today about development in the 21st century, of course, one of the key challenges is global warming and climate change. But sometimes, the challenge of climate change is used in the global north as a way to say to countries in the global south and typically in Pakistan or in South Asia, be careful, you should not develop too much, because we don't want to have too much carbon emissions, that's bad for global warming, which of course is a message which is impossible to accept from the point of view of the global south and just from the point of view of basic morality, because the global north, as we know, developed partly by exploiting the natural resources and also sometimes the labor of the global south, and by accumulating carbon emissions that have made this problem of global warming than we have today. So I think the challenge that we're trying to address in the Global Justice Project is how can we combine equal right to development in the future. So we are trying to look at scenario where all countries in the future reach the same level of living standards by 2100, which is officially what international reports, in particular by the IPCC, the International Panel on Climate Change, is trying to do. But in fact, if you look at their numbers, they never look at complete equality between countries. So we are trying to look at scenario where we have enough possibilities and investment for development in the global south that we get to real equality by 2100. And if we can do it earlier, that's even better, but this is already an ambitious productivity and living standards by 2100. In our benchmark scenario, next slide, we are actually trying to have a convergence of all countries in the world by 2100, which is possible at two conditions. First, you need very large investment in the global south in terms of education, health, climate mitigation, climate adaptation, capital investment. So this requires very large investment fund. And so what we propose here is a little bit to continue the discussion on climate reparation and how you finance the climate adaptation, climate mitigation in the global south. Sometimes we have the feeling that this discussion is going nowhere. At the Paris summit in 2015, countries in Europe promised they would abandon the climate reparation fund, and which they did not really put the money that they pretended. But I think that there has been some interesting development in recent years. In particular at the G20 summit 2 years ago, some countries from the global south, including Brazil, South Africa, push very strongly for the creation of a minimum global wealth tax on global billionaires that could help finance climate investment. Unfortunately, support in the north, because I think, so this is the spirit of the proposal we make in the Global Justice Project, is that this investment in the global south to get equality in the future have to be financed by the global rich in general. So of course they have to be financed by rich people in Pakistan, in India, but you don't have so many rich people in Pakistan, in India as compared to rich people in Europe, North America or China. So I think these are the large billionaires of the world and the large corporations of the world in general, all the most powerful economic actors that need to finance the climate reparation, because in the end, everybody in the world who has become rich in the past, or over the past 2 centuries, became rich by exploiting natural resources, by contrast, is that, okay, this requires a lot of resources, but as compared to the enormous private wealth that has been accumulated in the world, it's feasible. It's not completely crazy. This is doable, and that's what we try to show in the Global Justice Project. So, next slide. This will require a major structural transformation of sector. So in particular, the growth of the future will have to be much less material and more dematerialized. So we project that education and health by 2100 will take up more than 40% of labor hours in all countries. A huge increase, but this is a long-run perspective, and in countries which already today have 30-35% of labor hours in education and health, this increase to 40% is not so enormous, given aging of the population, the rise of higher education, many more students in universities, etc. I think this is not so enormous, and we look in the report on how to pay for this and how to finance all of this. Next slide. One important point also in the report is that we stress the fact that this will have to come with a reduction in labor hours, because we also want to limit the total material footprint of mankind. Now, this can seem completely idealistic and completely crazy, but in fact, this is already what happened in the past. So in the past, we made the choice collectively. It did not happen like this. These were, again, major social struggles, to reduce the working week in the 19th century, in the early 20th century. It's not something that happened just like this. But it did happen. And in the end, this was a choice, to work 40 hours per week instead of 60, to produce less, but to have more time with your family, with your children, and it was a very positive evolution for welfare, and it also contributed to reduce total material footprint, which has increased a lot, but which would have increased even more without the reduction in labor hours. And what we're saying is that we need to continue in this direction in the future. Has to come, next slide, with more gender equality in the distribution of working time. So in our basic scenario, we have equal division of working time between men and women, between domestic labor and economic labor. Now, this is also a very ambitious scenario, but I think this is part of the economic transformation that has already started to some extent in the past, and which has to continue if we want these goals to be achieved. Now, final conclusion, next slide. I want to understand, can you go next slide, the political difficulties. I think some of the political difficulties that we face today is that the sort of left-right political system which led to the rise of the welfare state and the compression of inequality in the past, today has been complexified. So in particular in Western democracies and to some extent in other parts of the world, we have seen the rise of what I call multiple elite systems. So, we have sort of higher voters with more education but less income who tend to vote more for social democratic party or left-wing parties, and then voters with less education and higher income who still vote for the right-wing parties. So the typical example will be, Donald Trump, who is very anti-intellectual, as we all know, and has a lot of wealth and cares a lot about wealth accumulation. And then the other example on the other side will be, someone with a very high degree. So if you have a PhD, to make redistribution work is that you need to convince the rural poor and the urban poor than what they have in common is more important than their differences. And there are periods where you are able to do this. So, this is the voting gap between urban voters and rural voters. And you can see that in the post-World War II period, this territorial gap was reduced, and it has increased again in recent years. So in other words, one of our conclusions is that, one of the main reasons why the reduction of inequality did not continue is that because territorial division and sometimes identity-based division in recent decades have become more important than class-based or vertical class-based division. And our conclusion, next and final slide, is that this movement, well, the final slide has disappeared, so I will not show it to you, but the conclusion is that, the movement toward more equality can continue if we are able to address these two challenges on the structure of political cleavage. So thanks a lot for your attention. And sorry for taking a bit more time than planned, but I guess we are all late. So I don't know how we want to organize the discussion now. I think you're going to join. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, thank you very much. My name is Akbar Zaidi. I've been asked to be in conversation with you, and we only have 11 and a half minutes. So it's going to be a little difficult because I wanted to get other people involved as well. So because as Jakub was saying, we've been trying to get you here for many years. So this is a good opportunity to talk. And they're just not accounted for in the way data is collected. And it's interesting.
Let me immediately respond to this. Of course, there are lots of rich people in Pakistan as compared to, average income in Pakistan. But I was talking, if you look at the global rich in the world.
Absolutely.
And if you look at the billionaire ranking in the world, I don't see many Pakistani people. Maybe they are well hidden. The Denmark number.
Yeah, it's just like Denmark. So I want to start with sort of read out the opening line of Capital Volume 1. The distribution of wealth is one of today's most widely discussed and controversial issues. Capitalism automatically generates arbitrary and unsustainable inequality that radically undermines the meritocratic values on which democracy. But But if you look at the data after COVID, for example, especially in the US and perhaps also in Europe, I'm not sure about Europe so much, but about the US, we see extreme levels of inequality suddenly rising, or wealth being created by the tech boom and the AI, and how that has undermined democracy as well. So could you sort of, because it's almost, without you even thinking about it, you've almost predicted this, how democracy has been undermined as wealth in a certain portion of the United States certainly has increased. Something about that.
So you are right that, you know, the level of concentration of wealth at the very top have increased, you know, even further and maybe even more than what I could have predicted 10 years ago. So just to give one number, you know, the richest people in the world, when I was writing Capital in the 21st Century, you know, around 2010, 2012, you know, Bill Gates had 30 or 40 billions, you know, euro or dollars in wealth at the time, and he was the richest people on the planet. Today, the richest people on the planet, instead of having several at 200, 300, 400, or even 1,000. Now, of course, the world economy has grown in the meantime, which is very good. But as you know, average income in the world, you know, was not multiplied by 10. You know, it has increased, but it was not multiplied by 10. So there's just a gap between the size of the pie and how the world GDP is going up, which is very good, and the level of wealth at the very top. And this is this gap which sort of the idea of R bigger than G in Capital in the 21st century was meant to capture. You know, the idea that you have a rate of return on very high wealth, or a rate of appropriation in some case, because if you think of the development of artificial intelligence, you know, this is the new East India Company. You know, they are just appropriating stuff that they did not produce. You know, they take knowledge that was produced by other people, so this is not the jewelry of the Maharaja, but, you know, this is knowledge produced by writers or journalists or whoever, and just they take it and then they make a response out of it to all of your questions without even telling you how it was constructing, without paying any copyrights, just exploiting, you know, putting, extending the notion of private property to stuff that they did not produce. And you know, this is yes, this is going even further than I could. But at the same time, and I want to give again, you know, optimistic and positive response. When I wrote Capital in the 21st century, 10 years ago, you know, I was advocating the idea of a global wealth tax with 5-10% tax rate per year on top billionaire, and in Capital and ideology, I go even further, 20, 50, or 90% on top billionaire. But, you know, this idea of a global wealth tax, when I wrote Capital in the 21st century, looked completely crazy. And, you know, all my colleagues, economists, were saying, you know, what are you talking about? This will never be on the policy discussion. At the top of the wealth distribution that we need to do something. And, you know, I think this discussion is not going to go away. You know, it's going to come back. And in the end, because of the enormous challenge we have to confront, in particular climate reparation, you know, I think at some point countries in the global north, if they don't, that will be the only way to pay for climate reparation, because the average taxpayer in the north, you know, they don't want to pay. So at some point they will make the billionaire pay, because that's all what they have to do. And so this will happen, you know. So you know, there are, in the past 10 years, you know, there's been some negative evolution, but I think there are also positive evolution, and in particular political mobilization, I think, in the global south is going to be more and more important. And I think, you know, you know, I know all this discussion from the point of view of Pakistan politics, you know, can seem completely abstract and very
grown, and where it's been addressed in some places, is that global poverty has fallen very, very sharply. China is, of course, the miracle, the Chinese miracle, and also in India and also in Pakistan, the overall poverty level over time has fallen, while inequality has increased. Now, how do you make an, because you talk about ideology and value judgments in your second book more than you do in the first. Now, how do you sort of square that? How do you talk about that? Could you just expand on that, inequality and the reduction of poverty at the same time?
Yeah, but poverty could fall even more, even faster. There's still far too much poverty, and, access to education and health, is so unequal. The average education budget that an average children is getting in Pakistan or in West Africa, or, as compared to all the money that is being spent in the US and in Europe to finance completely useless, luxury consumption, this is a shame. So, we could reduce poverty much more than we do. And, we have also need to invest not only in education, health, but in... Do you really think that we don't need this solar panel in West Africa? I think here it's clearly a problem of financing. Is that, the Chinese, like the French or the Americans, like to get paid for what they produced. And so the reason they don't send...
And the people who want to ask a question. So
Yep.
I'll just इसकी बैटरी नहीं चलती. So I'll just ask you one quick question because that's very important in your thesis, where you talk about participatory socialism for the 21st century. Given what's happening in Europe, in Britain, in the US, the way people are voting, the right wing rising, also in your country, where there's a threat, Macron and everybody else faces a threat, Trump is already in power.
Okay, so I agree that Trump is not the best way toward participatory socialism. I think this, we all agree on this. Look, I think what we see today is first, this is the fall of neoliberalism. And, now the response to neoliberalism, according to Trump or according to the Brexit people in Britain, is sort of neo-nationalism. So, because of the failure of neoliberalism, Reagan told Americans, you're going to benefit enormously from, free market globalization. Your average income, inequality maybe will go up, but it does not matter because the size of the pie will increase so much that, the income of average Americans is going to grow like you've never seen, and you're all going to be happy. Well, 3 decades after Reagan, the American middle class did not see, the growth that Reagan had told them. And this is where Trump and the Republican Party turn, nationalist. Basically, the political message is, well, this is because your hard work has been taken away by the Mexican, by the Chinese, by the Pakistanis, the Cambodians. They have all stolen the wealth of America. So we are going to put the guns on the table and get our money back by sending, the Air Force. Now, this is completely desperate. This is not going to work. And I think also this is a sign of a country, the US, which, they're losing control of the world. Their share in world GDP used to be 40% when the Bretton Woods institution were founded in 1950. It's now 15%, and it's going to go to 10 and to 5. And they are about to lose their veto power at IMF, which is something they are very worried about. But that's like this. This is the statutes of IMF. So they're losing control of the world. And so, Trump is a sort of desperate nationalist attempt to try to put the guns on the table. And that's not going to work. This is, so this is doing a lot of harm. But in the end, so to answer your question, I think we are going to get to, new form of social democracy. And I talk about democratic socialism. Some people prefer to talk about social democracy. That's fine with me. But we're going to get to new forms of social democracy and democratic socialism because neo-nationalism is going to fail. And, this kind of extractivist view of the world is not going to solve the challenges of the 21st century. So, neoliberalism is dead. They don't want to destroy the welfare state in Sweden or in France. They want to keep it, but they want to keep it for themselves, for the people who have the right color of skin, and they don't want to hear about climate change and the global south because they want to keep the wealth for themselves. I mean, I can understand their viewpoint, but this is not going to work. And at some point, some sort of global social democratic movement will have to come, because this is the only solution to our global climate and social challenges.
I would like to agree with you, and I do. But after 14 years of Lula in Brazil, Brazil is still, as you show in your book, like South Africa, which is a different case, has 56 to 64% inequality. So even there, where you have, and it's it is a pleasure to have you here in Lahore. Welcome. When you wrote your book Capital in the 21st Century, you addressed Simon Kuznets' curve, and you showed that R is greater than G, which was empirically proved that. But the data on inequality compression that you have presented today seems to me to contradict your earlier thesis that R will always be greater than G. It seems that even on the world scale, the data you showed, that in fact inequality decreased and then it increased from the 80s onwards. So, two questions. The Oxfam data, however, on inequality, global inequality, seems to continue to suggest that R is greater than G and is the basis for the rising plutocracy that Zedi Saab also spoke about. Am I misreading you? Firstly, that I need to understand that. And secondly, it seemed to me that R would be greater than G if R would be greater than G, given that surplus value would be extracted from variable capital from the purchase of labor power, that would be inevitable. But the compression data you present seems to contradict that. Let me just finish. Now, could it be, number one, that the data may be skewed because of the enormous wealth placed outside of accounting, offshore banking, and so on and so forth? That's my first thing. Or is it the case that R is greater than G is dependent on political configurations and not necessarily a universal tendency of capitalism? And given that what you suggest, yes, last thing, given that what you suggest about the redistribution of inheritance, is that premised upon, and the idea of global social democracy, egalitarian socialism, is that premised upon a neutral view of the state? Because we've seen social democracy has only been in the West and not been successful even in Brazil. Those are my questions. Thank you.
So let me say you that the answer is your second answer, which is that political forces can be stronger than R bigger than G. And so R bigger than G, is still true at the very top of the wealth distribution, which has been rising over time. But generally speaking, political forces and political institutions can always be stronger than R bigger than G, and that's what I have always thought and written. And sometimes I was a bit sad, after Capital in the 21st century, when some people had a very sort of pessimistic reading of R bigger than G, because my view has always been, and if you go back to Capital in the 21st century, you will see that there are political institutions that can be stronger than R bigger than G. So you can have progressive taxation, to reduce the rate of return for large wealth. And you can have more generally, when I talk about participatory socialism, to me this is in the continuation of the building up of the welfare state, which, when you have a very large public sector in education and health, of course, if you continue in this direction, this is a way to go beyond R bigger than G, because you just get out of the profit-making economy by producing health services, education services, but it could also be transport, energy, many sectors outside the capitalist logic. And historically, this has been extremely successful. If you look at the public health system in Europe today, it costs 10% of GDP to Europe, and they have a much better life expectancy than in the US, where they spend almost 20% of GDP through a private health system. So, what's the point of spending 20% of your GDP on health if you have less life expectancy than when you spend 10%? Well, that's because the very high profits in the pharmaceutical company or private hospital in the US are not doing any good in terms of high-quality health services. So this is an example, but it's an important example because health is a large economic sector, showing that growing number of sectors. So that's the way I envision this future step. Now, just to responding on the issue of Lula, I agree that, what social democracy was able to do in a country like Brazil is limited, but it's still, they have made some progress on important fronts. What they did on minimum wage, what they did on Bolsa Familia, on education grant for lower income students. It's not nothing at all, and we have to see, the political configuration.
They keep showing us that we are time's up. So I hate to interrupt you, but I think please join me, and Professor Piketty is here today, and I think hopefully tomorrow as well. So Taimur, please, and anyone else, thank you very much. Please join me in thanking Professor Piketty.
Thank you.